Hi guys, it's Rose, and welcome back to Shoot Lazy Vegan and another Vegan Talks video.
Guys, I don't know what happened, but something went wrong with my SD card, so you are going to be hearing my voiceover throughout this video, so hopefully you guys don't mind. But today's video, I'm basically going to be reacting to a TikTok that I saw where this creator seems to have a bit of a problem with vegans, and I'm just going to respond to some of the things that they said in the video. I know this goes without saying, but do not send any hate towards this creator. This is not meant to be any personal attack. This is simply me responding to the ideas in the video. But guys, before we jump into the video, just letting you guys know that I'm hosting 3 different vegan food tours this year. I'm going to Turkey and Greece in September, and I'm going to Bali in October. So if you want to travel with me, come along on an adventure. These trips are super fun, you guys, and I cannot wait to hopefully meet you guys somewhere in the world. Hopefully I'll see you in Turkey, Greece, and or Bali. Once again, the links for the trips are below, so if you guys want to come along, make sure you check out those links to book your spot now.
Okay, let's play the clip, and then we're gonna stop it whenever I have something to say, which is probably gonna be a lot.
I keep getting told that my products are unethical because I use leather, or people messaging me asking me to use vegan leather instead. And y'all, please stop. It is not more sustainable or ethical to use plastic over indigenous processed deer hide. If you want to live a life filled with environmentalism, then you need to look towards indigenous people, practices, and products.
Okay, so first things first, it's like literally 5 seconds into the video, and of course I got things to say. Now, my problem is, this is a straw man argument, okay? If you don't know what a straw man argument is, it's basically when you're arguing with somebody, and they say that you're arguing one thing when you're really not. It's kind of like this distorting your argument into something that it's not. Essentially saying that veganism is about environmentalism, and therefore you should care about the environment, and if you care about the environment, then you'd be completely fine with indigenous processed deer hide because it's more environmentally friendly than plastic. The problem is veganism is not about the environment. Yes, it is related. I believe a lot of vegans, most vegans I would say, are also environmentalists. I also care about the environment, but ultimately the reason why we have vegan environmentalists as different terms is because they mean different things. If veganism was all about the environment, then we just call ourselves environmentalists. Why are we calling ourselves vegans? Because it means different things.
I also resent the notion that the only other option aside from animal leather is plastic. If you guys have been in the vegan community for a while, you might know that there are other environmentally friendly options for vegan leathers. It's not just plastic or very environmentally damaging products, because as many of you guys may know, a lot of vegans do actually also care about the environment.
Although this creator did put on the screen when they said, oh, if you want to live a life full of environmentalism, they did put and ethics as text on the screen. It is very heavily implied that the only thing that they are talking about is essentially environment. There's very little focus on the animal rights aspect, which is the entire argument for veganism. Veganism is about animal liberation. First and foremost, it is about doing the least amount of harm as possible to our fellow animals, okay?
Something being environmentally friendly doesn't always mean that it's ethical or better for the animals or even humans. I feel like especially in recent years, we are always confusing sustainability and environmentalism with always being an ethical choice. But that's not always the case. For example, even simply our existence as human beings is horrible for the environment. We're actually a net negative for the environment. We're basically parasites on this planet, especially for those of us living in developed countries. So actually, it would be more environmentally friendly to unalive a large group of humans. That would actually be a net positive for the environment. That would be a very sustainable option. But would anyone argue that that's the ethical option? Would it be ethical to unalive a bunch of humans that don't want to be unalived? Obviously, it wouldn't. So this clearly shows that environmentalism and ethics can sometimes not align.
Veganism is a philosophy and a way of living which seeks to exclude, as far as is possible and practicable, all forms of exploitation of and cruelty to animals for food, clothing, and any other purpose, and by extension promotes the development and use of animal-free alternatives for the benefit of animals, humans, and the environment. In dietary terms, it denotes a practice of dispensing with all products derived wholly or partly from animals. So that is the description by the Vegan Society. Now, obviously, there is discussion of environmentalism because it is obviously linked, right? Like environmentalism and being kind to animals animals and other humans is all linked, because ultimately we do live in this environment along with other animals. But at the same time, there are certain circumstances in which you could say that something might be environmentally friendly or might not do any harm to the environment, but it's not vegan. You know what I'm saying? I guess I just don't like this demonization of the vegan community as a whole, and basically saying that we just don't care about the environment at all. We only care about the animals, when that's just not true. You know, based on my experience of meeting a lot of vegans in my lifetime, most vegans I know care a lot more about the environment than the average person. I can't help but to think that these environmentalist arguments against veganism continue to happen because people are constantly trying to find ways to argue against veganism, and they can't do it on an animal rights basis. Because in a world, in a society that claims to love and care for animals, how can you possibly sit there and justify the killing of animals for the sake of using their skin to make a shoe, right? So they have to pick other ways of picking apart the vegan argument instead of focusing on the real issue and the real concern that vegans have, which is animal rights and animal liberation. In a society that claims to love and care for animals, I think it is so funny to me that you don't want to talk about animal liberation and animal rights. Instead, you just want to talk about environmentalism, sustainability, without taking into consideration how many animals are suffering under the non-vegan industries that exist.
Furthermore, this whole debate can be settled if we just switch the animal. Instead of deer, how about we start talking about dog or cat leather? What if dog and cat leather was the most sustainable leather of them all? Would we be discussing how sustainable dog or cat leather is instead of using plastic vegan leather? Would we discuss environmentalism at all if the animal was switched to dogs or cats? There's no way that environmentalism would even enter the discussion, okay? We know this for a fact. So this clearly shows our blatant and obvious speciesism. We are so speciesist that we can't even bother to bring up the innocent animal that has to die in order to become our bag or our shoe. Instead, we have to talk about how these products are basically environmentally friendly. Okay, these products being the dead skin of innocent animals. And again, as I mentioned before, there are definitely ways in which we can make vegan leather more sustainable. We can also discuss the utilization of secondhand leather, which I'm actually a proponent of, although some vegans may disagree. And whilst I still support vegan leather products, I also support the use of secondhand leather, even as a vegan.
The thing is, when you actually start to talk about animal rights, it's very hard to argue against the vegan point. And I think this is why people focus on other aspects of the vegan argument. And in fact, they don't even focus on the vegan argument at all. Instead, they focus on attacking vegans, talking about how vegans are mean. Vegans are so judgmental. How about focusing on the argument that we're talking about rather than the character of the vegan, you know? But instead, we're always focusing, not we, the society is always focusing on vegans and how they behave and how toxic they are, rather than focusing on the actual argument at hand, which is basically that if you don't have to, we don't believe in harming the animal. Simple as that. For example, if you don't have to make leather boots, we don't believe that you should kill an animal to use their skin to make leather boots. If there's an alternative, we believe that you should use something else. Now, if we talk about environmentalism, we'll get into this in a second, but if we talk about environmentalism, you could say, oh, well, this is environmentally friendly because it will last forever. But if you actually focus on the argument that vegans would like to focus on, which is animal liberation and animal rights, there's very little you could say to argue for killing an animal to use their skin for a fashion item. Do you know what I'm saying?
The vegan movement is so focused on the no animal rule that they're forgetting just how racist they're being. And I see indigenous creators getting harassed all the time when they eat meat. But I have never seen any commentary from vegans about the polymer clay earrings. You know, the plastic earrings that pollute the environment?
Probably don't see commentary from vegans talking about plastic earrings because veganism is about animal liberation first and foremost. So obviously when we see a dead animal, which is a very direct kind of animal issue, right? Some vegans are probably gonna say something because that animals have been directly killed. So obviously this is an issue that we care about. So yeah, we might say something. With the plastic earrings, yes, that might indirectly impact animals because of the environment, but essentially this isn't a vegan fight, right? Like, yes, it is, but it's not. Do you know what I'm saying? And I would just love to see how people would react if we also started commenting on plastic earrings. You know, people already say that we're judgmental and preachy. It's like, do you want us to be more judgmental and preachy, or do you want us to like never say anything? Like, it's like, you know, what do you want us to do? I don't know what you want, okay?
It's just funny to me when people say that vegans are judgmental and preachy, we should mind our own business. Yet also people ask us, why don't you also talk about A, B, and C? So which one is it? Would you like us to talk about the various issues in the world, or would you like us to shut up? Because we can't have it both ways, my friend. It's quite frustrating that any form of activism, whether vegan or not actually, is always met with whataboutism. What about this? What about that? Blah, 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 blah. Yeah, let's talk about it all, but just because you say, what about this, doesn't dismiss the problem, the initial problem that we're talking about. Okay, you saying, oh, what about these plastic earrings? That doesn't mean that the original issue that we're talking about is not an issue.
If you're vegan, that's totally fine. Go you. But please stop with that holier than thou act. Please start decolonizing your veganism. Start actually learning about what is sustainable, what is ethical, and why colonization has infiltrated the vegan movement so heavily. It is well known that the vegan movement is incredibly racist. It's well known that the vegan movement is more set on harassing people rather than actually being sustainable.
Oh my God, sustainable. I swear to God. I swear to God. Where do we start? So much to unpack. First of all, I hate this. If you're vegan, that's fine. Good for you. I hate it, okay? It annoys me. If you're vegan, go you. But please stop with the holier than thou act. This annoys me. Vegans are always told that we're being holier than thou, that we think we're better than everybody else. We're just sitting on our high horse, even though we don't ride horses. If we switch the animal, everyone's on their high horse, okay? Everyone's holier than thou when we switch the animal to an animal that we normally don't abuse, okay? For example, dog abuse. Any sort of dog abuse, and you guys know, it goes without saying, I love dogs. Dogs are my favorite. I've got 2 dogs at home. I used to have my lovely Minnie. Where is she? My Minnie there. Dogs are like my favorite animal. They are the best. So obviously, any harm to dogs is awful, heartbreaking, and the worst. However, that doesn't mean that it is not hypocritical to be against dog abuse and yet be completely okay with the abuse of cows, chickens, and pigs and other animals that we have deemed acceptable to abuse. As soon as you see abuse toward any other animal that we have deemed worthy of not being abused, everyone becomes holier than thou. Everyone becomes worse than vegans, by the way. The way that people talk to animal abusers of other animals, it's way worse than vegans would ever talk, because we would be criticized if we talked like that. For example, I made a video about this like years ago, but there was a YouTuber family, I don't know if they still exist, but a YouTuber family that essentially euthanized their dog because their dog was showing a little bit of aggression or something. Basically, they euthanized the dog very, very kind of abruptly when it probably wasn't necessary, and they could have probably rehomed the dog. And that story blew up, okay? Everyone and their mom was freaking out about that story. I just found that to be understandable but hypocritical, right? Because it's like we're in this society where, and I know this because I'm in the vegan community, so I know how much criticism we get for essentially talking about an issue, for even just bringing up an issue, an industry, a problem, and saying maybe we shouldn't contribute to that problem. And we get so much backlash and so much criticism for talking about the issues and bringing light to the issue. Yet, when this happened, the amount of harassment and criticism that this family got for doing that thing, the comments under their videos, it was shocking. I'm just gonna read you some of the comments that I screenshot yesterday. You and your wife are sick. I cannot believe you murdered your dog. He didn't die, you murdered him. No sympathy. I think the words you needed to say were, we murdered our dog. You didn't even try. You should be disgusted with yourself. He didn't pass. He was murdered. Shame on you both for murdering your dog. This is not a good look, and I'm absolutely disgusted. And somehow that's acceptable, right? And yet when vegans bring up industries and talk about these topics that are, systemic problems, so much bigger issues, we are told to, stop being holier than thou. We're being holier than thou. How are we being holier than thou when we are just concerned for animals that are being killed and tortured and abused every single day of their waking lives? How is that being holier than thou? Once again, we're focusing on the vegans rather than veganism and what vegans are talking about, issues that vegans are talking about. We're not focusing on the issues. We're saying, oh, vegans are just holier than thou. They think they're better than everybody else. Inherently, we don't believe that harming animals is a good thing. So when we remove ourselves from harming animals to the best of our ability, none of us are perfect, when we remove ourselves to the best of our ability of harming animals, then yeah, maybe that means we become slightly better people. No?
Caring about and pointing out a justice issue involving innocent victims who are sentient beings is not being holier than thou. It's actually the opposite of being holier than thou, because vegans don't believe that we are morally superior to animals, at least not to the point where we have the authority to abuse and unalive animals as we please. The holier than thou mindset is when people believe that because we're human, we can do whatever we want to non-human animals. Let me ask you, would you rather buy a plastic leather bag, or would you rather buy a dog leather bag, or even a human leather bag? Now, I assume even if you are not vegan, most people would say they would rather buy a plastic leather bag, even if the dog leather bag was much more sustainable to produce. And I assume also that a lot of people would be vocally against a dog leather bag. And I assume that there would be protests all over the world if we started using dog leather. Would we consider those protesters to be holier than thou, to be against dog leather and speaking out against it? Is it really holier than thou to be speaking out against issues that harm innocent beings?
The creator also says it is well known that the vegan movement is inherently racist. With no elaboration, no citation, no elaboration, nothing. We're just supposed to believe that as a fact. I don't know how well known that is. Okay, I think that's quite a heavy accusation. And as a member of the vegan community myself, I'm not saying again that it is a perfect community. There are definitely racist vegans out there, which is quite a funny statement because veganism is about anti-oppression. So really, none of us should be racist at all. And yes, we should be fighting for the end of oppression of all innocent beings, including humans, of course, okay? But again, if you're gonna make a statement like that, and I know that TikTok is a short form content platform, but I feel like you gotta elaborate just a little bit as to why we're being racist. Now, the only way that I can assume what they're talking about is basically when vegans are essentially, I guess, going to indigenous pages and saying, don't do this, or criticizing indigenous practices.
Great majority of vegan activism is geared toward factory farming and the mass production and the mass consumption of animals. So that's why you see a lot of vegans outside, massive slaughterhouses or, showing footage of factory farms, because that is where we believe the problem lies. The majority of the problem lies. So I feel like this is another straw man, basically saying that, vegans are specifically targeting Aboriginal communities, when really all I see are people criticizing vegans for targeting Aboriginal communities and saying that we're against Aboriginal practices, when in practice, I only see criticisms of that. I don't actually see vegans doing that. And I've been in the vegan movement for quite some time. So I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I just don't think it's as big of a problem as people say it is within the vegan movement.
Now, what I will say is if vegans are doing that, they're also doing it to every other animal abuse, okay? They're not just picking and choosing, this specific creator, because they're indigenous, I'm going to target this practice, okay? If anything, vegans are the ones that are saying all animal abuse is wrong, no matter what culture, no matter what race you are. That's the entire point of veganism. Firstly, I will say this, and this might be controversial to say in today's day and age, but culture is not an excuse to do bad things, okay? And I will say it again. I'm not talking specifically about indigenous practices, but what I'm saying is culture is never an excuse to do bad things and to harm innocent beings, okay? And that goes for all cultures. You do not get a pass because you're a minority. I am also a minority. I do not get a pass to say my culture, this and this, and no matter what sort of practices we practice, my culture is off limits. There's no criticism. That is absolutely ridiculous, okay? Cultures shift and change over time, and we learn and we move forward, okay? We don't just say, this is how it is, let's just keep things the way it is, because then there's literally no progress. The whole point of life and culture is that it shifts and changes over time as we learn new information.
Now, that being said, I still believe that at this current day and age, our main focus as vegans and animal rights activists should be on the mass production, mass slaughter of animals, rather than focusing on fringe practices or specific minority cultures that may also use animal products. I think there's a balance between respecting a culture and respecting certain practices, but also understanding that we don't necessarily have to abuse animals at the same time. At the same same time, it's also a balance between obviously talking about animal abuse in all forms and not just sugarcoating certain types of animal abuse because it comes from minority groups, but recognizing that those minority groups or those fringe practices may not be the biggest issue at hand, and recognizing that, the bigger issue is factory farming, late stage capitalism, and the mass production and mass slaughter of animals.
So this idea that if you criticize a certain cultural practice, that means that you're racist, I think that that's wrong. But let's talk about the racist thing for a second, because I actually think that vegans don't necessarily do this. I mean, at least not in the mass scale. But you know who does this? Non-vegans. Non-vegans are racist toward certain cultures and criticize certain cultures, especially when it comes to animal rights and animal issues, okay?
Obviously, I'm not talking about all non-vegans here. I'm talking about non-vegans that fight against certain specific cultural practices that abuse animals, yet still participate in animal abuse themselves in just a different cultural context.
What I mean by this, now, obviously, a lot of you guys may know that in Asia, in certain countries, China and Korea, for example, dog meat is or was a thing. I think in Korea, they have banned it now, but for years it was a thing. I think in China it still is a thing, and people have been eating dog meat for however many years, okay? It's obviously something that I would never support and I don't support. But I also don't support cow meat, pig meat, chicken meat. I don't support any of that because they're all innocent animals that don't want to die. And that is why I'm vegan. So that is the consistency that most people that are not vegan lack. And what happens is, in today's society, so many people criticize China and Korea for having a dog meat industry or for eating dog meat. And I find that to be the most hypocritical thing in the world. In fact, when I was like 12, before I was a vegetarian or vegan, I remember I would argue with people online being like, listen guys, I don't know why and where and how this happened, but basically it would be with regards to, the dog meat industry in Korea. And so many people that were fighting against the dog meat industry, they were like activists, okay? And I was like, listen guys, unless you're vegetarian, which I don't think you are, I don't think you have any right to say anything about this, because this is a cultural difference, okay? In USA, they eat cows, chickens, and pigs. In Korea, they eat dogs as part of that. Explain to me the difference. Explain to me the inherent difference. And I remember saying, if you're vegetarian, then yes, you have something to say because you don't eat any of that, so you're at least not being a hypocrite. But they were not vegetarian, these people. Okay, I didn't even know what vegan was at the time, but they weren't vegetarian. So they would argue against, dog meat industries, specifically dog meat, but not argue against other types of meat. And so many people do this, especially in the West, okay? Because West is best, okay? Let's just do what we do, and everything we do is fine. Western society is so sophisticated. We don't do anything wrong. So everything we do is fine, but what those Chinese people do, what those Korean people do to those dogs, that's horrific and that's horrible. But what we do is completely fine, even though historically, the West has eaten a lot more meat, so done a lot more damage to a lot more animals, and yet the focus is on demonizing countries like China and Korea for eating a different type of animal. That's more racist, in my opinion. That is a lot more racist because, again, vegans, we don't discriminate. We hate it all, okay? We hate all forms of animal exploitation, and we try to live our lives in that way as well. We don't just critique others and point our fingers first before looking inward, okay? Because it's not easy to go vegan in a society that's not vegan. Okay, but we decided to go vegan based on the information that we were given because we wanted to, we wanted to make sure that we were living by the standards that we're setting, right? And we wanted to make sure that we were living our lives, ethically as much as possible before we start critiquing others. So that's the difference, okay? So I would say that the non-vegan community, the non-vegans, not all non-vegans, but a lot of non-vegans are a lot more racist towards certain countries for their unethical practices when you haven't even cleaned up your own backyard. Right? That being said, I know some people will say, well, I think it's fine. Culturally, I say people just respect each culture. And if someone wants to eat dog meat, that's fine. If someone wants to, do this, that's fine. Like I mentioned, I'm also against that aspect. I think we should all, no matter what culture, no matter what country, be open to discussing ways of making our practices more ethical. Nobody gets a pass because they are of a different background. Now, that being said, do I think that the main focus in this day and age of our activism should be toward mass production, extreme capitalism, factory farming. Yes, I think that should be our main focus. This is the biggest problem. This is where most of the problem lies. And obviously I understand that, you know, certain countries and certain communities, they have to hunt and they have to fish and they have to eat animal products to survive, to eat and get by. And I totally understand that and I respect that. And that is written into the vegan definition. It's as far as we can possibly take it, right? So we don't expect, at least any rational vegan would not expect, you know, somebody living in a community where they are hunting and farming to survive to stop doing those practices, at least until we are at a point where people can follow a plant-based diet and, you know, live comfortably and healthily. Yeah, I just feel like we're being gaslit. Us vegans, we are being gaslit to think that we're the problem. And sometimes I also am like, are we the problem? Because when I first watched that TikTok, I literally was like, are we the problem? Like I had a moment. Okay, and I started thinking, oh my God, are we the problem? And then I marinated, okay? I marinated in my thoughts. And I realized that once again, we are being gaslit into thinking that veganism is the problem. The vegans are the problem, when we are simply pointing out the problems, okay? This sort of messaging makes it seem as though veganism is an awful movement. That's what it sounds like, right? Based on the criticisms that you hear, it's like people think we're evil or something. The amount of criticism people give vegans. It is insane to me that this is a movement about animal liberation, about doing as little harm as possible, about anti-oppression, and yet we are given this image of these extremely racist and horrible people that just like are on their high horse and can't shut up and oh my God, we're just so awful. So yes, do not be a victim to gaslighting, guys. We are not the problem, okay? Literally, we're about trying to not harm animals. That's essentially our whole point. Now, you may disagree on our practices, you may disagree on how we go about those things, but you have to understand that our intention is to do less harm to animals. That's our intention. And yet society loves to demonize us. It's so frustrating. I think there's a way of respecting cultures and cultural practices and at the same time being rational and logical about the changes that we might want to make. Firstly, in our own culture, okay, before critiquing other cultures, first of all. But yeah, it doesn't have to be either, oh, my culture is right, the other cultures are bad, and those bad cultures need to change, or every culture is fine because culture should be protected, yada, yada, yada. Like, there's a middle ground, okay? There's a middle ground, which is we can respect each other's cultures and cultural practices, but we don't have to continue unethical practices once we have new information. All right, you guys, so I think that brings us to the end of the video. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. I'm sure you guys will have a lot of thoughts. Let me know what you think, okay? Comment section down below. Make sure you follow me on TikTok. I do post little things like this once in a while where I just kind of rant about something. So if you enjoy that, follow me on TikTok. Also follow me on Instagram. Make sure you subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Make sure you thumbs up this video if you enjoyed it, guys. Check out my Vegan Talks playlist. I'll link that down below. And once again, check out those trips that I'm going on. If you want to come with me to Bali or Turkey, potentially Greece if there's that one spot available, make sure you book that right away before you miss out. And thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!